Hi, this is Serena Halstead.
And I'm Melissa Smith.
And I'm Spencer Ziegler, and we're excited to announce our new podcast, Data Lit. So this podcast is coming out of the Data Research and Accountability Department from Wake County Public Schools, which is around Raleigh, North Carolina.
So you might be wondering, why talk about data and assessment literacy? And specifically, so we are, as many of others, experiencing the COVID pandemic. And one of the things we have been forced to do is be a little bit more reflective than we typically would. And so we sort of decided that this would probably be a good time to sort of reflect on what does it mean to be data and assessment literacy. And as three educators, sort of share our thoughts with others. So forgive us as we are recording this from our homes. And so there might be some drops in volume or in what we say, but know that when we started this, we're starting from our homes with the hopes that we will one day return and kind of be recording collectively together. So again, why data and assessment literacy? So one of the things we've always found as teachers is that they're always asked to make data-driven decisions. And I don't know about you, but when you're asked to make decisions around data, I have never really taken a course on looking at data or looking at assessments while I was teaching. They tell you, make sure you create a really good test. But all of the stuff that I have had to learn over the years came from on-the-job experiences. And so it is really important for us to sort of share what we know and are learning about data and assessments, because again, that is the evidence that we have and we collect so that it informs our instruction about what students know and understand and are able to do. And then how can we as teachers then respond with our teaching?
Yes. So as three of us being the host for Data Lit, we will be bringing up various topics throughout about assessment and data literacy. And we also invite you to chime in on your thoughts about assessment and data literacy. And from time to time, we will have some guests, some experts in the field to share their thoughts about data and assessment literacy as well.
Very true. And we're hoping this is going to be beneficial for teachers within Wake County, but we've set up the topics and conversations so that I think they should be applicable for anyone interested in education, be it within Wake County or outside of it. Melissa, what topics are we going to hit upon this season?
So some of the topics that we thought that are interesting to us and to others as we look at assessments and data would be looking at the different assessment methods that we use, right? When you have to create a test, the different items that we pull upon, we have some choices in there. And so we're going to be doing a series on the different assessment methods. And then, there's always that topic about, is it formative? Is it summative? And so we want to do a series around the different assessment types and when are they most beneficial to our use. We're also thinking about the topic of feedback, right? Feedback as a teacher or as a student is really essential and key to the work that we do. And so we will also be discussing what works for feedback and what makes feedback effective and what are the characteristics that give us the most bang for our buck. We'll also be looking at a hot topic, grading. And so especially during this time, there's been a lot of conversation about grading. Should we grade? Don't grade? Zero grades? What does that look like? And so we want to do a series around grading topics and what works best for us in the field. Then we also thought about rubrics. So, when you give an assessment that requires some sort of rubric, what does that look like? What should teachers or educators consider? What should students consider when we are building rubrics? And then, of course, it can't all just be about assessments. Data is also a key part of it. Once you get the assessment, then what should we be looking at when it comes to data? And so analyzing data, the different types of data, and how do we pull all of that together to kind of make informative decisions.
Yeah, and if there's any other topics that you guys want us to cover, just let us know. So before diving into those specific topics, we wanted to take a moment to have each of us share a personal connection that we might have with assessments or with data. And I can go first. So for me, it's interesting. I don't really have too strong of a memory of particular assessments, but one does stand out. And that was from, I think it must have been 9th or 10th grade English class with Miss Fredette. And I can't recall like any of my teachers' names, but that one pops in mind. And I know the assessment, it was some kind of writing piece. I can't tell you specifically what I was doing, but I can tell you that when the teacher was passing it back, when she gave that assessment back to me, she looked me in the eyes and said, "You're a pretty good writer." Whether that's actually true or not, I'm not certain. But I can tell you that one tiny offhanded comment that she probably didn't even consider a minute before or a minute afterwards actually stuck with me for whatever reason. And that perhaps charted my path to become an English major and eventually an English teacher. And for me, it was just a reminder of, we're going to go into a lot of depth on a lot of the technical aspects on data and assessments. But ultimately, the most important piece is that relationship between the teacher and the student. And that one comment that this teacher gave me, it really hit home. It stuck. So, Melissa, what about you?
So it's interesting that Spencer, while you had a positive relationship with assessments, for me growing up, I tended to have a more negative experience with assessments. And it's not in every subject, but mine was around math. And it's interesting that I once did this math assessment and I was struggling. And I remember my teacher telling me, I went and I asked her, can she help me out? I just got the test back. And she said to me, if I couldn't figure this out, then I'd never be good at math. And that sort of had a lasting impression on me in terms of assessments and the power of feedback and what it can do to you. So it's interesting that whereas the feedback that you got from assessment made you think that you were good, the feedback that I got from my assessment made me think that I wasn't good in math. And so I sort of made it my sort of mission to kind of keep that in the back of my head and sort of be a little bit more intentional about the feedback I give or assessments that can, that can help not just myself as a teacher, but help students as learners. Serena?
So on that point, Melissa, in terms of assessment, I am just thinking about the time when I actually get a chance to create an assessment, thinking about the process of, what goes into creating the assessment. And so one of the things I think I would have been good at back then, I was able to SWOT for a test. I can do really good on recalling information. And so doing that, if I could just get a couple of hours, to look over some information, I would be good at it. But not really thinking about how much goes into the process of a teacher actually trying to create this test and trying to assess what I know. And so I got the opportunity to actually work with a team of persons creating multiple choice assessment. And when they actually created the assessment, like coming up with the stems and the foils, it was one of the most difficult tasks for me. While I could actually create the stem, I just could quickly ask the question about the content. Coming up with the distractors for that stem really was mind-boggling. And it dawned on me, what if I could possibly teach students to think about the distractors, think about the correct answers, think about the distractors, think about what the process that goes into creating an assessment. That for me was like breaking the code, right? In terms of what is assessment? What are we pulling from student? What are we trying to assess about students' learning? So I think that experience of, creating an assessment from scratch, that really makes me think about what's the purpose of assessment? Why am I giving it? What really goes into it?
That's interesting. I feel like we kind of, the stories we shared touched on the both the art and science of assessment and data. That, Serena, you're going into like the science behind it and how important that is to make sure that you're measuring what you're trying to measure. Then Melissa and I are sharing almost more the art of administering it and the relationships that are core to doing so. And you need both. You can have the perfect assessment, but if a teacher's administering it in a way that's not useful for kids, then it's going to fall flat. Likewise, a teacher teacher that has those relationships with kids also needs to make sure that they have the instruction and assessment that's going to tell them what they need to know in order to improve instruction.
Right. And it also goes back to, even if you're not the creator of the assessment, what do you do with the information that you collect? Right? Is it that you're just giving students numbers for, a test with 10 items and you just say, oh, you got a 9 out of 10? And how much do you go back and look at what is it that students answered correctly, what they did not answer correctly? And what does that tell you about your teaching in terms of what the students answered? So that whole assessment, definitely we have to look at the feedback portion of it, the building of it, the students' part in it, and then our part in providing quality feedback to our students about what they did in the assessment.
And I think that's really key, because I think oftentimes as educators, right, with all of the stuff that are required of us that's on our plate, you sometimes forget the learner aspect of it, right?
Yeah.
And so you forget that when you give an assessment, the data that you collect is not just for you, but it should be for the student as well, right? Because if the student is not able to do anything, then there is no change in that learning trajectory, right? Because I can teach as hard as I want to, but the student isn't responsible for their own learning. So if I'm not providing them with a way to make sense of the data that they're getting so that they can make different decisions, then it's for naught, right?
I feel like we kind of briefly touched upon a number of different topics that we're going to discuss in more depth this season, starting with the next episode, which is going to get into just what is the purpose of assessment, and look at different models for what this word means. And from there, we'll go into different assessment methods. And as we're discussing each, it's going to be the three of us chatting, but we want to bring you guys into the fold as well. So if you have any thoughts or questions or comments or things you'd like us to chat about, you can reach us at www.wcpss.net/datalit. There you can find recordings and episodes and a spot where you can send us messages. So thank you for tuning in. We look forward to chatting with you guys more as the season goes on. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.